What if the first sign of dementia didn't look like dementia at all? No memory loss, no confusion, just a strange sentence. A moment so subtle you almost ignore it, but years later, it was the first sign something was wrong. Most people miss it. Even doctors often don't catch it in time, because the brain doesn't always scream for help. Sometimes it whispers, and if you're not paying attention, you won't hear it. This video will show you what most families overlook until it's too late. Let's begin with number 1. Why do I keep losing everything? It started with little things for Marcia, 70, glasses, keys, her phone. She'd misplace them, blame others, then forget she'd even moved them. That question, why do I keep losing everything, echoed for 2 years before she was diagnosed with early onset dementia. By then, she'd lost more than just objects. She was losing trust in herself. A medical review found that repeated complaints about losing or misplacing objects are one of the most common self-reported issues in the preclinical stage. The hippocampus, the memory center, begins to weaken. People don't just forget where they put something, they forget they ever moved it. That missing link in the memory chain creates a feeling of helplessness and frustration, which often spills over into denial or even blame. At a certain point, they no longer trust their own mind, and that realization can be terrifying. When this happens often enough to become a repeated phrase, it is no longer forgetfulness. Number 2, why is everyone talking so fast? Ernest, 76, said conversations felt like a blur, even though his hearing tests were normal. He told his wife, "I can't keep up anymore. Everyone's rushing their words." At the time, no one thought much of it. But that strange comment came nearly 3 years before his Alzheimer's diagnosis, and it was the reason he stopped going to social gatherings altogether. Studies indicate that early cognitive decline can affect auditory processing speed, the brain's ability to follow speech in real time, especially in noisy environments. It's not about hearing, it's about comprehension. The ears work fine, but the brain begins to lose its rhythm, making conversation feel overwhelming or disorienting. Even in calm settings, a person might find themselves falling behind mentally, needing words repeated more than once to fully absorb them. This change can be isolating, leading to withdrawal from family and friends. When someone says others are speaking too fast or too much, the problem might not be the room. It might be how their brain is trying to keep up. Number 3, you never told me that. Grace, 69, insisted her children never told her about family plans, even though they had. This reaction, repeated again and again, was dismissed as stubbornness. But the truth is, she had already begun to slip. Her early-stage Alzheimer's was confirmed just 2 years after those arguments started, and her children regretted not recognizing the signs sooner. Findings suggest that people experiencing early short-term memory loss often deflect, not to lie, but because they genuinely believe they were never told. This is because the moment simply didn't register or stick. To them, it feels like the other person must be wrong. This type of defensive confusion happens because the brain fails to create a memory trace, and without it, the person assumes the event never occurred. The emotional toll can build, straining trust in even the closest relationships. Repeated denials like this aren't just frustration, they're signs the brain is quietly starting to miss pieces. Number 4, that's not what I meant. Lucille, 74, began mixing up words. She'd say the wrong name, leave sentences unfinished, or ask questions that didn't make sense. She didn't seem aware of it, and when corrected, she'd get defensive. "That's not what I said," she'd argue. It was nearly 2 years before her Alzheimer's diagnosis, but the language had already started to unravel, piece by piece, almost invisibly at first. Experts report that language processing often begins to falter early in cognitive decline. People may misuse words, lose vocabulary, or say things they didn't intend. But the scary part is, they may not realize it's happening. The brain begins forming incomplete sentences or swapping words subconsciously, and because their awareness is fading, they become convinced they're speaking clearly. This misunderstanding often leads to frustration, conflict, and further withdrawal, especially with loved ones who can't understand why communication has changed. When someone repeatedly insists they said something different, it may be a signal that language and self-awareness are starting to disconnect. Number 5, I think something's wrong with my brain. 4 years before she was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, Diane, 71, started saying this during quiet moments, not out of panic, but a kind of awareness. "I'm not forgetting anything," she told her daughter. "I just feel off." Her doctor said she was fine, but the feeling never went away, and over time, she grew more anxious, though she couldn't explain why. Experts report that people in the earliest stage of decline often sense that something isn't right, even when standard memory tests show nothing unusual. This internal awareness is known as subjective cognitive decline, and research confirms it often appears years before measurable impairment. It's not about forgetting names or getting lost. It's a subtle but growing disconnect between how a person feels internally and how they appear externally. That disconnect often lingers quietly for years, unnoticed by others. When someone starts saying this, even casually, don't dismiss it. It could be the brain's very first cry for help. Number 6, I just don't feel like myself anymore. Nancy, 67, said she felt flat, like something inside her had dimmed. Her family assumed it was depression, but nothing seemed to help. That phrase, "I don't feel like myself," was the beginning of something deeper. It took over 2 years, but her diagnosis finally came: frontotemporal dementia. The emotional shift had quietly hollowed out the person she used to be. A medical study suggests that changes in personality, motivation, and emotional expression can appear early in some forms of dementia, even before memory is affected. People may lose their spark, they may feel disconnected from their own identity, and they may not know how to explain it, except to say they're no longer themselves. Unlike depression, this sense of disconnection doesn't lift with time or support. It's a quiet warning that the brain's emotional wiring may be changing beneath the surface. Often the change is invisible to outsiders, but deeply felt by the person inside. Number 7, stop changing things. I can't keep up. 3 years after Ronald, 75, began obsessing over routine, doctors confirmed he had mild cognitive impairment. But the earliest clue came long before, when he became upset over small changes like a new cereal box or rearranged furniture. He had always been flexible but now said, "I just want things to stay the same." That rigid preference, once out of character, slowly crept into every part of his daily life. Research confirms that people in the early stages of decline often lose cognitive flexibility, the ability to adapt to new information or changes in routine. What once felt easy becomes frustrating. Even minor adjustments to familiar routines can feel jarring, as if the brain can no longer absorb new patterns without confusion or stress. It's not resistance, it's mental overwhelm showing up as resistance. If someone who once embraced change starts fearing it, take it seriously. Number 8, everyone's against me lately. Before George, 78, was diagnosed with Lewy body dementia, something darker began creeping in. About 2 years earlier, he started accusing neighbors of spying and even told his wife their daughter was hiding things. He seemed more fearful than angry, but the paranoia kept growing, and eventually, his world began to feel hostile and unsafe. A study revealed that early paranoia and suspicion can appear before major memory problems, especially in certain types of dementia. the brain begins misinterpreting reality, and people start reading hostility or betrayal into everyday situations. It's not just fear, it's a breakdown in the ability to evaluate social cues and intentions. Even loved ones begin to feel like threats. These false beliefs grow stronger over time, making it harder to intervene before the damage deepens. This type of suspicion is one of the most painful signs for families to witness. When someone suddenly believes others are out to get them, it's often more than personality. Number 9. You're the one who keeps messing things up. Ben, 69, wasn't always angry, but something changed. He began snapping at his wife during small disagreements, shifting blame anytime something went wrong. "You told me the wrong time," he'd say. "You're always confusing me on purpose." These outbursts began roughly 3 years before he was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, and by then, the damage to relationships had already taken a toll. Findings suggest that defensiveness, irritability, and blame shifting are early emotional changes in dementia. As memory falters, people experience anxiety they don't know how to explain, so they blame the people closest to them. This isn't just a bad mood. It's a protective instinct kicking in as cognitive decline sets in. They feel confused and scared, but they mask it with anger, turning their fear into accusations. The lashing out becomes a shield, hiding the fear they can't put into words. When this kind of anger becomes a pattern, especially from someone who used to be calm, it may not be personality. It may be fear showing up as blame. They don't always forget first. Sometimes, the earliest warning shows up in the words they say, a strange phrase, an unexpected question, or a sudden shift in tone. These aren't just quirks. They're early signs that something deeper is breaking down. Notice them early, and you have a chance to act. Ignore them, and the silence that follows is the one thing you can't undo.
And there you have it. What are your thoughts? Next, dive into this video for more essential tips to transform your health and help you thrive. You're going to love it. Thanks for watching Healthy End, and we'll see you there.